Okay. Hello and welcome to the Rugby Chat episode 36. Wow, we're getting up there now. The SANZAAR review. So tonight we are going to be talking all things about the SANZAAR review, you know, whether they should increase, decrease, get teams in, play around with the Rugby Championship, all of that kind of lovely stuff. I'm Paul, the guy behind DrivingMaul, your best place for rugby opinion and predictions. That's what I do. Yeah, lots of predictions. So tonight we're going to do something a bit different. You can just see me at the moment, but I'm going to bring in the three guys who are joining us. Ashwin is going to host the evening, and I'm going to drop off and, well, I'm going to be around, but I'm going to be keeping an eye on the old live chat and coming in with a few questions every now and then. So I'm going to hand over to Ashwin, and he will introduce his two wonderful guests. So Ashwin, it's all with you.
Well, welcome everybody, and as said, Paul says, it was a little bit different today. Going to be discussing everything SANZAAR and where things are heading. So today, joining us, we have David. Welcome, David.
Thank you, Ashwin. Nice to be
here. And Pierre, also joining us, one of my West End Massive friends. How are you doing, Pierre?
Very well, thank you. Good evening, Ashwin. Good evening, Dave.
Right. Well, as said, we'll crack onto it. We've got, just so everybody's, as Paul mentioned, he'll be in the chat room, so make sure you put your comments up there, and we'll get Paul to sort of update us with what's happening in the chat room as we discuss some of these issues that we're going to be going through, as I say, with SANZAAR and where we're headed with them. So to start the old debate off, the discussion off, we're looking at is SANZAAR right to stabilise Super Rugby format for 2019 and 2020? Who'd like to kick off on that one?
I'll weigh in on that, frankly. Look, I don't think it could be any worse if they tried to improve it again back to 18 teams. So I understand the need to drive this thing forward by keeping an even number of teams and actually have a conference system that people sort of understand. But at the heart of it, I think the current system is deeply flawed, and you're seeing that play out in the way that people are watching it, or more importantly, not watching it.
David, you want to add something to what Pierre has said?
Yeah, and I think, look, I'm a simple person, and I think, like most rugby fans, I like to have the complexity of the game and the actual 80 minutes of football, not the actual tournament structure. So, look, I think 15's the wrong number. I think 18's the wrong number. Yeah, you've got to be going with 16 and multiples of 2, so 16 or 32, and I don't think they can find that many more teams. So 16 is the number for me, and they've got to have nice, round, even numbers that everybody can understand and it makes sense.
Basically, and if we've got nice, round, even numbers, there's probably no requirement for buys, etc., as well, to complicate matters.
Absolutely. I just look at something like the American football NFL structure, and 32 teams, but it's lovely. It's 32 down to two conferences of 16, 4 divisions of 4 within that, and it works great. It's not reliant on geographical location for those teams, and I think they should do something very similar for Super 16, which has got a nice ring to it.
I guess what.
Sorry, go Pierre.
I was going to say, I guess the counterpoint to that, David, is some of the real challenges that people see in some of those conference divisions in the NFL, where you do get heavyweight conferences full of 2 or 3 high-quality teams, and then you get others where there's one standout team and a whole bunch of people who are terrible. So I think there's a real issue there around the fundamental equality of conference systems and whether or not they're actually equitable for teams. I can't see us going back to Super 12 where everyone plays everyone, but that did have a real sense of, I guess, authenticity to it, that the team that finished on top by and large was significantly the best side. So anything that moves us back towards that, I would say, is a good thing, but I just don't know how that fits in with the modern need for dollars in the game.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think you can somehow find a hybrid on it. I think you're going to go with a dual conference system where you have, you want every team to play every team. We saw it happen last year or the year before, where the Lions got through to basically a playoffs without playing a New Zealand team, and it felt there wasn't a sense of parity or equity in there. So if you can somehow get a conference system with everyone playing everybody, plus you have the ability for, if a certain conference, let's just say there are 4 people in New Zealand conference and it's really, really working well, that those 4 teams can all get through somehow in that point system.
I guess I'd say in terms of the current competition, and this might feed in later in the day, but it seems to me the current competition is very much based on what's best for broadcasters rather than what's best for rugby. And it really highlighted at the weekend when you see, and I mean this as a Blues fan, but far and away the worst side in New Zealand, beating the best side in Australia away from home, but that Australian side's third on the table and gets to host a home semi-final. It just seems patently ridiculous.
Absolutely, and there are some good stories in there with that. I mean, you look at the Jaguares as, I guess, the standout story of this season so far, I think, and they have, they seem to be suiting this conference system. They've got a chance, but they're far and away a rare occurrence. So some way where you get. Is it right to say there will always be an Australian team based on the current system or a conference system in the playoffs? Well, if they're all playing like they are at the moment and it's 38 streak against New Zealand teams, then no, they should not be able to make the playoffs. It's that simple. But you do want to have the opportunity for some teams to be able to come up through that conference system. So finding a bit of middle ground, I think, is important. How you would do it, I'm not sure. Personally, I think 4 conferences, top of those conferences go through, and then 4 wildcards. That means that if you have a New Zealand conference, for example, and there were only 4 New Zealand teams, which I'll talk about later, then they could all get through.
Do you think we can, I mean, like in terms of the stability of a competition, if we were to lose a couple of South African teams, does it take anything away? Is it still the competition that we want if we did have 2 teams disappear?
Yeah, I think it's not so much the teams disappearing as the players disappearing and diluting the quality that goes north. I mean, to me, the 2 fundamental threats to Super Rugby are the travel factor, that you just have this global conference or this global system where players are having to literally fly around the world. And I'm not aware of any other sporting competition that offers that sort of travel challenge. And you've got to find a way past that. And maybe we'll touch on that when we start talking about the Rugby Championship later, because I think they've done about as good a deal as they can do in terms of making that travel more equitable. But the other problem is really around the dealing with the economic pressures from the Northern Hemisphere, where so many players are just being offered more money, less travel. Why wouldn't you head up to the Northern Hemisphere to play an 8 or 9 month season as opposed to the 10 or 11 months you're playing down south?
And I think we take that for granted in New Zealand, that we do have that depth, and there's that kind of pride and prestige between playing for the All Blacks, that you will turn down big money to stay in New Zealand if you are kind of first, second, third, potentially even 4th pick for a position. And it's only really people at the twilight of their careers that are heading overseas for that big money. That's just not in other countries. So I think, I feel for those South African players who are seeing a massive payday up north. Why would you stay? There is obviously still that prestige in that Springbok jersey, but it's not quite the same. To stick around for that kind of travel and potentially a conference system where the draw is just not in your advantage, and you're going to be putting yourself out there for 18 to 22 weeks of the year. That's a lot of impact on your family when you could be going a much shorter trip up north and catching in.
Well, it's interesting though, isn't it? Because the thing is that they've actually made it easier, or they've made a pathway now for Rassie to actually pick Springboks outside of the home unions, for want of a better term, out of Europe, if they are critical to or key to his team. So it's sort of breaking down those barriers of having to stay at home to play for the Springboks even, and still getting the good dollars out in Europe.
Absolutely, and I miss the Kings and the Cheetahs from the Super Rugby competition. To be honest, I really was enjoying them last year. I thought, and it was sad to see them go. Like, I understand why they went, but some of their play, particularly near the end of the season, was looking fantastic. Paul's holding his hand up.
I was going to say the Blues really miss having them around. That's all.
I was going to add that myself.
There's still Australian teams.
True. Just one point from Andre in the comments was actually that it's been 3 years since the Sharks and the Crusaders have played each other under the current systems.
Mm. And we played the Waratahs this year and last year away from home. It seems bizarre. Blues, that is.
So yeah, the way that they do the scheduling is really strange. I'm sorry, I'm butting in when I shouldn't be. I'm supposed to be back in the chat, but anyway. But the way they do this, you say the schedule, like Blues play Waratahs away 2 years running, that kind of thing shouldn't happen. Things also like teams will go away for their tour, come back, play one game, and then have a bye week. The whole schedule. I mean, the Blues I think have played the Chiefs twice in the first 4 or 5 weeks this season. That kind of the whole. I like the whole idea of in Europe is you play all the teams once, and then you play them all again. And I think having those 2 games against each other so close is a bit wrong. They should try and spread those out, and they should also, if you're going to have rest weeks, then have them after teams come back off tour.
Absolutely. I think you're not going to get, even if you went a completely kind of linear schedule where everybody started on, let's say there's a circle of games as you travel around the globe, and everybody just starts at the same position and they move one game across. People are going to argue that even that is going to be unfair, because if in your first week you get the Sunwolves versus getting the Crusaders, that's an inherent bias. So you're never going to get a draw that is going to be completely equitable. But there are some things you can do, some simple things, like if you are going to go on that big 10, 12-hour flight, that might be the time you get the bye, and then you have your tour of that country. Simple things, but again, like you mentioned earlier, we are dictated by money and broadcasting. So until that can go away, and it's never really going to happen in modern society, but it is something to think about. And I think it would be better for player welfare, because we've already seen like some of these teams are only, just past halfway in the competition. And look at the Blues, at the Chiefs, their stocks are completely gone. They're going to have to rest players. The Blues aren't going to have to rest players for the playoffs. The Chiefs might not have to at this rate either. But they're going to have players to teach them to the playoffs.
And not only the injury tolls, I mean, the injury tolls are horrific, and it seems to have gone higher again this year. And Ash and I have spoken over the odd beer about the dangers of professional rugby. As our players get bigger and stronger and faster, they start to really push the limits of what the human body can handle, I think. And I think you're starting to see that with some of those climbing injury tolls. But then, and again, I'm saying this with the Blues hat on, you look at the effect of the injuries, means that we're taking Rico Ioane and Akira Ioane and playing them into the ground, because they're the only players left standing who are of any, test quality. And it has this knock-on effect through the rest of the teams. But the degree of injuries this year has been unprecedented as far as I can tell.
And even worse, they're now going to stick some All Blacks games in the middle of it. I mean, I would love to see a Super Rugby competition, which, going back to my example, there were 16 teams. You play every team once. You've got, say, 15 games and 3 bye weeks, 18 weeks, and you just push through it. And you don't try and put in tours in the middle of it. I know it might be inconvenient for broadcasting and for the international tour, but just commit to actually getting the entire tournament in and done. Don't have massive breaks in the middle. Don't try and expect people to play 10 weeks of Super Rugby and then front up for an international game. If they really want to have good quality rugby with good player welfare, these should be things they consider.
And I think now you're starting...
That leads us into the question 2 quite nicely in terms of, and we alluded to this a little bit before. So what about the size of Super Rugby? Do you shrink it? Does it stay the same? Does it expand? And as you talked about before, with the different bringing in different conference systems, is that the option? So where does the size of Super Rugby go to? I mean, again, there's so many dynamics that we've just talked about in terms of player welfare, for example, with number of games. There's broadcasting responsibilities, for want of a better term. Where does it go? Oh, crickets.
My number's 16.
Yeah, look.
Mine. Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, look, I understand the need for the numbers. One of the real challenges is still that you've got this problem in New Zealand and South Africa that you're trying to squeeze a second competition in after Super Rugby. So your pro players are playing Super Rugby, and then they're having to go and play Currie Cup or ITM Cup, depending on what's there, except for the probably top All Blacks in New Zealand. I can't talk for the South Africans. Just going back a touch too, because I think it does influence the nature of the competition and potentially the number of teams. Until World Rugby sorts out a calendar that is clear and consistent, you're always going to have this problem of needing the June inbound tours to actually pay the bills, because no one gets money at the end of the year when they tour the Northern Hemisphere. But all the Northern Hemisphere sides touring in June is what actually pays the bills for the rest of the year. They're where all the big broadcast money is, them in South Africa. So not splitting the competition is true to a competition, but it then introduces all those other challenges around scheduling and money and revenue, which ultimately you can't go past, but I'd argue shouldn't be the primary driver for the game.
Do you increase the squad sizes to sort of negate the impact on players then? I mean, at the end of the day, it's a business. Let's face it, it's a business, right? So that it's about the dollars. So that's probably almost at the top of the list in terms of what happens with the competition. So is it a case of to maintain the quality, we need to grow the squad sizes to actually be able to have the players' welfare taken care of and them in a state that can actually produce good rugby?
I guess the counter-argument to that is the Blues and the Chiefs at the moment are in their expanded squad right now with the number of injuries they've got, and how are they playing?
David?
Yeah, I think, look, you control the variables in there. I think you're absolutely right. We live in an environment where the dollar rules. You can't get around that. Your international games essentially pay for these competitions, particularly when you look at some of the crowds this year. Not great. Particularly, Eden Park is, it's sad to see it every week. But the variables are you change the system, you have fewer games, you break up that competition into two halves. But again, I think people can relate to a system where every team plays every team. It is the most equitable way. Now, like I said, I keep on saying 16 is the number for me, but that might not work with a mid-year tour. So do you drop it? And if you do drop it, how do you then if you're below that magic number of 16, you're always going to run into problems. They're trying to do it this year with 15, 3 conferences of 5. It makes things more difficult. Do you drop down to 12 again? Probably not. You're cutting out too many good franchises. So there's got to be a way. I don't think playing some teams is the way. I do believe playing all teams at that 16 number of teams is the way to go. I think there should be a New Zealand team dropped from the New Zealand Conference, and I really believe that. And whether we have the Blue Chiefs or the Crusading Highlanders, I'm not sure. But I think it would make things a lot easier to have a four-team South African conference, a 4-team Australian conference, a 4-team New Zealand conference, and all the others. Now, that assumes South Africa don't bail. And I think that's probably been a little bit of huff and puff in the media from what I can tell. I'm not really across it. But I don't think they're going anywhere. So what you're really looking for is one more team. Where is that team coming from? Sorry, 2 more teams if you do on teams. So where do those 2 teams potentially come from if you're going to expand?
Yeah, I think you're on the money there, and the fact is that shrinking the competition's not an option. The only way you're going to grow the revenue is actually to introduce teams, but it's that balancing act between introducing teams and maintaining quality, because if you don't have the quality, then you're going to lose viewers, which is sort of happening a little bit at the moment, especially within the Auckland region, obviously with the performance of the team, and that's going to happen, and that's natural. So it's a balancing act between, obviously, the only way to increase revenue is to increase the number of teams, because then you increase the number of people watching, but you've got to maintain that quality is coming through as well. We might cut through to Paul and see what's. Yeah, sorry, go David.
Sorry, the only other thing the other way to increase revenue is to introduce yourself to new markets. Now, obviously, the rugby kicking off in the United States, now that's a giant market, and it won't be there in next year, but it could develop. So it'd be interesting to see. I think out of, to be honest, I'd like to see a Pacific Island team in there somehow represented. I'm not sure how you do that. That's not going to give you a whole lot of revenue. Let's be honest, it's probably going to be more an investment. Absolutely, yep.
So no, look, I mean, I suppose I've got the major rugby league in America is the one that they've got 2 years to sort of try and get some good quality and some good rugby happening there, and then that opens up that opportunity for SANZAAR or whatever form SANZAAR takes in 2021 to sort of look at those teams out of there and bringing them through to the Super Rugby competition.
So I guess I'll throw a couple of things in there too. The first is around Japan, because we didn't talk Japan. Japan has the single highest viewership of any country of a rugby match ever. The match after the Japanese beat the Springboks in the last World Cup, I think they had something in the order of 20 to 25 million people watching the Japanese rugby team, and that is, as far as I'm aware, a single country record. So as a market, they are hugely untapped and have the potential to be a real source of revenue and global growth. They're also hosting the Rugby World Cup, of course, next year, which is going to be phenomenal. On a personal level, I would be delighted to see the US West Coast join the rugby competition. And the reason for that is that we might actually finally see a return to afternoon rugby in New Zealand, which will be prime time in the USA. So we might even be able to start playing our All Black Test matches at 2:30 on a Saturday afternoon, which would be a Friday night, 7:30 kickoff in the Western Seaboard, which would be delightful as a personal opinion.
Actually, I was just about to throw to Paul in the chat room and see what's been discussed in there, because we actually had a bit of a discussion around Japanese rugby a few weeks ago, it might have been, and the fact is that the approach into the Japanese rugby for Super Rugby has not quite been what it should have been. They haven't got the buy-in from the existing clubs because they've got invested interest, and Paul's got a better handle on that, and he might want to comment on that. Paul, you got something you want to add there with what Pierre mentioned with Japanese influence on the game?
Yeah, and the problem with the Japanese setup is what happened there was the union saw an opportunity to get control and money, and so they jumped on the idea of having a Super Rugby team. They didn't talk to the companies that run that are in the top league, and because they didn't do that, the top league companies are not interested in Super Rugby, and they just don't want their players playing it, which is unfortunate. What they needed to do was get them invested in it and say, right, look, you guys own 49% of it of the Super Wolves, and we own 51% or something, and then say, look, our end goal is to have a conference in Japan, and of which we'll break up into teams of 3, and you get one sort of Super Rugby team each, and you kind of promote your own players into there kind of thing. That's how I think they should have done it, but they haven't. They're just fighting, and it doesn't help. The Japanese union is basically amateur. There are no professional. No one's paid in the actual Japanese rugby union. They've got no money, so it's a very It was an attempted grab at power, and it's failed basically. Some other things in here. We've had questions, things like, no, don't go to America, has been shouting out. No, you can't get rid of a New Zealand team. And these the kind of, I guess, some of the things you'd expect. Some people actually like the 16 team idea. Others are going, well, let's get back down to 12 teams, all that kind of stuff. It's not going to happen, folks. But yeah, those people sort of like the idea. Even a suggestion, boys, that the Blues should play at Tull Stadium. What do you think of that one?
Well, the interesting thing is that we've had that discussion, Paul. We absolutely both agree, being Blues supporters, that, and Pierre is as well, and he'd be happy to go there because he's got a batch up there in Whangarei. But we've always agreed that there should be games. The Blues should be playing games up in Tull Stadium, up in Whangarei. The times that they've been taking games to North Harbour is just crazy because it's basically 20 minutes up the motorway, not even if there's no traffic, and on a Saturday night there isn't. It's stupid. And they basically, those games that they've played at North Harbour when they have, should have been played at Tull Stadium up in Whangarei. And that's from a fan.
Yeah,
that has a season ticket at Eden Park.
think they were talking more frequently than just once a season, full time. But basically, the stadiums that the teams playing are too big, and so you don't get any atmosphere, and it just comes across badly on TV. I think that's one of a myriad of problems that we have. But yeah, they're just playing big stadiums.
Well, to be fair though, 10 years ago, Eden Park would get 35,000 people for a good quality Super Rugby game, and that was when the Blues hadn't won anything for some time. So it's probably fair to say that the teams are so poor they can't attract the people, and people are not that motivated to go anymore. Sorry, Ashwin, you were going to say something in there.
I was going to say, so the thought that I've actually had in the last couple of weeks is that one of the things that they sort of say, at the player level, I actually think that the problem actually starts right at the top with CEO and board, etc. But the player level, they sort of say, that they come because it's so hard to get together in Auckland because of the traffic or etc. etc. Whereas at the other franchises, the players hang around after training, they do things together. Why not relocate the Blues to Whangarei? And they do play their games up there, and they are based up there, and the players live up there. They're going to then start, supposedly, if that theory is correct, they're going to spend time together as a team and build those bonds.
No, you cannot not have a team in the biggest city in New Zealand. There has to be a team. You've got a quarter of the population there. You can't take rugby away from that crowd. Now, maybe they don't care and they don't turn up, but you've got to at least try and sell it to those people. Another one that actually, I just want a little hand grenade thrown there. What about a Pacific Island team or two?
Yeah, David alluded to that. I think
the PI team. It's a financial disaster, but hey, wouldn't it be nice? Let's be honest, it's not going to happen. Yeah, they'll get some token games, and that's around it.
And where do you play them? I mean, that's the fundamental issue, though, is where do they play, and where are the stadia which can handle the rigours of a season, and where are you going to find the players? Because a lot of the good PI players have wound up on contracts up north. So I think it's a great in theory, very, very hard to deliver in practice concept.
There's only one stadium, and that's the Fiji National Stadium, I think it's called. That's the only stadium that's even close to being able to cater.
Where have the Crusaders been taking teams? That's Samoa?
Yeah, no. It's Fiji. So
it's Fiji.
They've played. The Crusaders have played the Chiefs, and those games have been in Fiji. The game that the Blues took up to the islands was in Samoa.
It's been the Chiefs taking it, not the Crusaders.
Yeah, the Chiefs have been taking it.
And the Highlanders are taking one this year. What about Hawaii? That would get you the American dollars and would be Pacific.
Yeah, look, I mean, just before we weigh into Hawaii, I was going to throw in one thing about having a window of opportunity into the USA. The US loves their American football, but they are really struggling with the concussion implications of playing the game in that way. If you could get a toehold into that market, it's difficult. A number of colleges play there already. If you could get a toehold into that market and start to get some quality teams in there, you might be able to build something with a serious revenue base. But watch that at your peril, because if they take it seriously, they will beat everyone else in the world. And you only have to look at the Olympic sevens to see how non-powerhouses very quickly become very, very good when they take something seriously.
Like Kenya.
Yeah,
we can't go to Hawaii. We can't go play a game in Hawaii. There's lava everywhere.
We've got one in Auckland. Wait 50 or 100 years, see what happens.
Look, moving into question 3, we've actually been dancing around question 3 anyway. I mean, issues like extra team per conference. David mentioned, sort of like having reducing it down, isn't it? So having 4 conferences of 4. A new splitting it east-west, conference style, American style. Although, as we said, those American conferences, geography doesn't really come into it. And then, we've even mentioned the likes of the islands, and as we mentioned with the islands, it's just like, I don't think that there's a true rugby fan that wouldn't like to see a Pacific Island team, but every rugby fan that wants to see that Pacific Island team realises that financially it's just not practical.
I think too, not just financially, but logistically too. Sorry, David. Who coaches it? Who selects it? How do you decide? Who do you pick? How do you actually do talent scouting between a variety of different? Why only 3? Sorry, David. You were saying something in there.
No, I was going to say exactly the same thing. Who's going to coach it? And how do you come up with this generic kind of Pacific Island kind of team? It's like you said, it's what every rugby fan wants to see, but logistically it's very difficult. And the only thing I can think of, I guess that would be huge as well, as it can be a little stopover to obviously South America, but potentially if you go into the west coast of but you're still looking at, massive flights. So I looked at this today just out of interest. Auckland to LAX was 10 hours. LAX to Buenos Aires was 10 hours. Buenos Aires to Auckland was 10, 12 hours. So you've got this terrible triangle of travel. So you can't get around that. So it would be nice to have Pacific Islands in there as a little bit of a stopover.
The reward points would be awesome, though. And I mean, in terms of other teams coming through, I mean, David mentioned right early on he liking the Hagiwaris, and they're actually starting to develop into a good team. Possibility in 2 years' time where they'll have start to build that depth to have a second team, possibly.
Forget. Well, maybe, but I mean, I think we should also reflect on the Jaguares. Who was the last side that came to New Zealand in the Super Rugby and won more than a game? I mean, you'd be going back 4 or 5 years, maybe longer. I don't have the numbers at the top in front of me, but that is a huge achievement. And yes, it was. Sorry.
Yeah, and on the back of two, not as impressive, but on the back of 2 away games in Australia as well. There's 4 away games in a row. Just 4 away games in a row is insane. Even the Crusaders and the Highlanders, you would be struggling to go back and see 4 in a row away. And it would be nice if you saw that also happen with the Sunwolves. They're probably a couple of years away, obviously, from getting anywhere near that. But if you do see that develop, and suddenly in a couple of years you've got 2 Japanese teams, 2 Argentinian teams, and that depth is starting to develop, you've got a seriously interesting competition on your hands, which is looking really global.
And I think, I mean, if you wanted to actually align those guys, Argentina and the west coast of America is a beautiful spot to start putting some outposts together in terms of grouping up with the same time zone or similar time zones. Travel's not horrific. It's in time zone travel, so it's not as bad. It's a possibility.
And plus, you won't actually be dealing with the United States, potentially. You might just be dealing with the independent nation of California, so that could be a real bonus.
I'm going to have to get a Make America Great Again cap to annoy you, aren't I?
California great again.
I'm thinking about make the Blues great again. Ashwin, we should get some made and get them down to the ground. That'd be a hit, I'm sure.
We'll have to get Paul from Blues Supporters for Life to put it in front of him. Make Blues great again. I was going to say something, but I've forgotten. As my train of thought's gone. You've just blown it.
I was just going to talk briefly about Japan, and we haven't really talked much about South Africa joining the Northern Hemisphere, but the hemisphere divide is actually a real problem, and you've seen this when you go up to play the Sunwolves in the Southern Hemisphere winter and it's Northern Hemisphere height of summer. I remember the Blues had to go up there last year. I know I'm talking about the Blues, but I to be honest, I have little time to follow other rugby, which is probably an indictment on where I am in my life with a lot of commitments at the moment. But we had to go up there and play in 40-degree heat, and it was horrific. I lost the game, which had other issues as well. But this is the same problem, is that if South Africa starts to straddle the hemisphere divide and manages to get themselves into Europe, where do they play? Because their competitions are going to be based around the Northern Hemisphere winter, which becomes the Southern Hemisphere summer. So what are they going to do? Are the Springboks going to go and join the Six Nations? I mean, I can't see the Six Nations agreeing to that. They're very local. They have no travel. They have the best travelling fans in the world because of that proximity to each other. And what do they do if half their teams decide to go and play in the Northern Hemisphere club comp and the other half play in the Southern Hemisphere comp? You start to deal with a bit of overlap in July and November, and otherwise you're in June, July, and November. Otherwise, you're in the scenario where players are playing at completely different times of the year.
Where are they fitting in the Curry Cup? Because it's one thing that they've always been adamant about is maintaining the Curry Cup.
Is that the wrong move?
Paul wanting to jump. Paul's got his hand up. I don't think he wants to go to the toilet, so we'll jump to him in the chat room. Paul. We're not hearing you, mate.
Let's try again. Through. There we go. I've managed to get the mute off this time. There's plenty of chat in the comments saying that they think South Africa will leave, and that probably is going to kill Super Rugby. And there is that chance. Listening to G-Man, who is a YouTuber today, he had a chat about the whole moving up, and there's talk they're actually running two of each franchise running two teams. So the Sharks running a team in Super Rugby and in the Pro 14, and doing it that way, just like because he said, look, the Cheetahs managed to do it in Currie Cup and Pro 14, so why not? So you might see the franchises playing 12 months of the year all round and running two teams, which would be interesting. I mean, a lot of the South African players already go overseas to Japan in their off season, so they don't have off seasons; they play all the way through. So maybe that's the South African future.
Interesting when we've just talked about player welfare, and they're going to start playing 12 months of the year.
And so where are the Springboks playing again? I mean, they're trying to integrate players at either end of their season. I think it's more challenging than people probably think.
Yeah, I mean, you raised an interesting point. Where are the Springboks going to fit into it? Because I don't see them making it the Seven Nations competition unless they drop Italy and they keep it 6 and bring South Africa in.
I can't see them bringing South Africa into the Six Nations, though. It's a cosy little comp. There's a lot of money on the table, and there's very little travel involved. How do you go to players and say, hey, we'd like to take you from an hour down the road to Rome to a 12-hour flight down to Cape Town, please?
Make sure you got your vaccinations as well, please, before you board the flight.
Yeah. And again, I mean, I hate to say it, but I suspect money rules in that scenario. David, what do you think?
But sorry, I jumped in. But surely the money in South Africa is bigger than the money in Italy on the money rules business.
Yeah, I don't know what to make of South Africa. 12 months of rugby seems ridiculous, to be honest. I'm surprised they can even get away with playing the and I know nothing about the Currie Cup, but how they're managing to keep the high quality players in there. And I think what you saw in New Zealand, which is really the only market I know anything about rugby in, you saw the ITM Cup and its various incarnations suffer straight after the introduction of Super Rugby. But what it's transitioned to now is a slightly different competition, and that it is obviously a second tier, but it is a completely different set of players generally, and you have got a different style of rugby. And I think what South Africa should look at if they were serious about staying in Super Rugby and committing to it, which is debatable at the moment, is looking at, does the Currie Cup need to be that kind of high tier type of rugby, or can you bring it more down to a provincial kind of rugby?
So Andre says that basically the Currie Cup is being sidelined and becoming a second tier competition. The big difference between the Currie Cup and the Mitre 10 Cup is in the Currie Cup, the Sharks players basically play for the Sharks. The Western Province players play for the Stormers. And whereas your Griquas and your Pumas teams that are in there basically have no Super Rugby players or very few. So they don't. Whereas in the Mitre 10 Cup, they disperse. And it is, you say it's different squads. It's not so it's the repetition of. This is why the derbies aren't working in South Africa. Is that basically Super Rugby derbies are just a repetition of the Currie Cup, missing a few. Yeah, exactly. Just missing a few Springboks, or including a couple of extra Springboks. That's why in New Zealand the derbies are really big, because they're different to the Mitre 10 Cup, but they're not in South Africa, and that's one of the issues they've got down there.
And I actually felt that last year's Mitre 10 Cup, the quality of it actually was better than it had been for a long time. So we're actually seeing a bit of a lift in the quality of our second tier competition, which is good to see, so that it does sit by itself as a good quality competition, as opposed to just waiting for Super Rugby players to filter down into it.
Look, if I was a benevolent dictator, and I'd like to be, so watch the space, but if I was a benevolent dictator, I would turn the ITM Cup into a proper development comp where it is semi-pro and the Super Rugby players are not playing. And that then takes the squeeze out of your calendar so you can start to play Super Rugby for the sort of length of time that you want to play it without having to worry about it, because you can run the two comps in parallel. You don't have players appearing in both competitions. Not happening at the moment, but you look at these Super Rugby players who are going up against club players from some provinces, and it's just a mismatch. It's not right and it's not fair. So I do
agree with that sentiment. Actually, the only thing is that one of the things we're missing at that sort of ITM Cup level in particular is the grizzled old veteran coming in that teaches the young guy his trade. You see it with the main centres more so than say sort of the your Nackies and the like, because the fact is that the main centres have just got young squads, and they haven't got the old grizzled veterans that have been playing for years, learnt the tricks and all that, and passing that information on to the younger guys in the team. So I absolutely agree. I mean, when we see that in Auckland Club Rugby as well, Auckland Club Rugby is basically under 21s that have just stepped up the next year. And that's it. You haven't got that 35-year-old prop that's telling his hooker and his other fellow prop, do this, do that. You haven't got that happening, and that's actually part of the Auckland rugby problem.
It's not just an Auckland rugby problem, though. I think that's a rugby problem in general, that people's lives have got busier and it's harder to find time to play sport through their late 20s.
There's that, but there's also the fact is that there's lots of second-tier competitions around the world that pay you money, and even as a harsh term, but as a nobody out of New Zealand rugby, you can pick up a contract somewhere overseas, playing in some sort of second-tier competition.
While we are talking about this, one of my other bugbears is how early Super Rugby starts. I mean, starting it in February during the cricket season just does my head in. And I don't think it's good for the players, and I certainly don't think it's good for the fans. I'd love to see it pushed later in the year, have a short run and then an inbound tour if you have to break for the inbound tours, or figure out a way to deal with that. And then you can actually play it right through the heart of winter, because right now the comp's going to be finished in, what is it, July? Come back last year. The Blues came back from the international break, had 2 round robin games, and then straight into a playoff series. It was just bizarre and not healthy.
And you do get that glorious day in summer where you've got a test match starting at 10 a.m. going through to then 3 games of Super Rugby. But for that one day, it's
it's an awesome day, isn't it? It's an awesome day.
That is a negligent parent day.
And again, I'll throw it out there, but if your team's not doing very well, by the time the cricket season finishes, you're out of the competition anyway. So it's a pretty tough intro to winter. As a Blues fan, hello, Ashwin.
That's right. We picked up the Ford Trophy this year.
There is that. But okay, one of the things we've got to do, though, is you either play Super Rugby and you play it through international games, or you have a second competition for the non-international players to play in, because otherwise they just don't get enough rugby, where the international players end up playing the Super Rugby and the international games for an extra 14 test matches, which is what the All Blacks play nowadays. The Super Rugby players who aren't internationals need something to do in those 14 weeks, otherwise they can't earn a living. So what do you put there?
With those 14 games, how many of those are rugby championship games? 6? So could we just get rid of them? Is the rugby championship still relevant when you've got South African, Australian, the Argentine Jaguares and New Zealand teams smashing each other for 15 weeks of Super Rugby? Do you really need to have that championship each year? Now, revenue aside, is that still the competition it used to be, or could you drop it down to playing each other once?
I think you've hit the nail on the head with your revenue aside comment, though, which is, if you neglect all the money, then you're talking about a whole different discussion. That rugby championship is, as I understand it, what basically funds Super Rugby. Excuse me, I'm just going to mute while I cough.
It's like special
So
effects.
we just needed some on-hold music while he was coughing. Sorry.
Hopefully it didn't just deafen everyone online. But no, I mean, look, and so for me, I would say I think the Rugby Championships is a good competition. It's a tough competition. You're playing everyone else home and away. They've structured it in a very sensible way with the travel. I think they've finally got that right, where you play those back-to-back games. So you play 2 weeks, then you have a week off. To do travel if you need to travel. And I think that's really reduced the effect of travel on some of the results, which has been fantastic. So I'm a big fan of it. I love watching it. I think the quality of rugby's superb, and that was borne out in the World Cup last year with the 4 Rugby Championship last year. 3 years ago now, where the 3 Rugby Championship sides were the 4 Rugby Championship sides were the 4 semi-finalists at the World Cup.
Absolutely, yeah, it's a good point. And so, and bearing that in mind, so you kind of raised that question: can the Rugby Championship change? Well, no, based on revenue. So, yeah. So, what do you now do? What else can you shift around without? We've talked about Super Rugby. What other parts of the puzzle can you now shift around?
So, I guess I'll just challenge that thought though to say, well, yes, the revenue's there, but if you start looking at revenue, you start to bring in again Japan and America into that discussion about how does that look. Now, they're Northern Hemisphere, they're playing at a different time of year, but maybe there is an opportunity there to try and bring them into some form of rugby championship, because if you want money, if you want to play fewer games and make more money, Japan and America are the 2 big ticket targets, I would have thought.
Yeah. Well, just interesting talking about, game numbers and that, and it brings us into our next topic, sort of next question, the concept of, say, like a Pro Bowl type game. Can we fit it into the season? Would we like to see something like that? A Southern Hemisphere Lions tour, a Southern Hemisphere Lions team, some sort of composite team that's different competition, adds a little bit of interest. Is there room? Do you think there's interest in it for starters before we even got room for it?
Can I speak as a completely one-eyed All Blacks fan and get lots of hate for saying it? The beauty of the Lions is that the sum of the parts, the makeup of those teams creates a greater team. I don't currently with how New Zealand are operating. I don't see how combining players from other nations is going to make a better team.
Who would you bring in even?
You're not going to put any Australians in there. You might put a couple of South African. Look, you might. There's a couple of Higuaí's players, but that's just my opinion. Like it's, you can't take for that Lions tour. You take one of the countries, and they are a weaker team than the Lions. I'm not sure with a Southern Lions or what would be the I don't know, albatrosses. I can't even think of a decent Southern Hemisphere animal. The seals. Penguins, I'm not sure.
Blue whale.
the
Blue whale tour. Every 4 years.
Yeah. Now I like barbarians, but yeah, I'm struggling. Now hopefully the kind of that domination of New Zealand rugby does go away, and that you've got a better spread and you've got more even teams. But at the moment, I'm not sure I see it.
Well, I guess though, if you look at Northern Hemisphere rugby too, there have been times where the Lions have been absolutely dominated by one or maybe 1.5 nations, and the other 1.5, 2 have hardly got a look in. So I think you need to look at this not just as where it is now, but if you went back 5 years, 7 years potentially, you're starting to talk about some absolutely quality players from out there, from outside of New Zealand who would be having a crack at this. I mean, wouldn't you love to see how good Israel Folau could be if he got his hands on some coaching and a team that would put him into the air and give him balls to contest on a regular basis? I mean, it would be tremendous. Or Guinea with a pack that's going forward. I mean, how good could that guy be? So, yeah.
Well, our favourite Twitter poster, Mr. Folau, I mean, he wouldn't go too badly in an all black backline.
Yeah, so I'd argue there's how many of them you've mentioned Guinea, of course, and yeah, I agree that I'd say Guinea versus Smith could be interesting. Folau, yeah, maybe there's six
weirdo.
there's 6 quality wings I can think of in that position where I would probably put him maybe at 5th. It's hard. Fullback. It's
and you can. Sorry, I'll just jump in on that. And I can think of a number of South African blindside flankers who are just big, strong beasts of men. Willem Alberts, guys like that who are just dominant in that position. I think you could assemble a really interesting side out of that. A South African tight 5, some locks from there. I think you'd have a different side, but it'd be interesting. It would be interesting. And again, don't look at the current All Black dominance and the current South African weakness. This is an aberration, and I don't think it's going to last forever. But as a concept, I think maybe something like that every 4 to 6 years could be really interesting.
Absolutely, and it'd be interesting if that actually caused that kind of that All Blacks domination to wither away potentially, like if there was that kind of thing in the mix. But yeah, completely agree. We are in a strange times at the moment. That 38 win streak against Australia is not right, and how the Blues won last week, I'm not quite sure. There is something strange in the water, and I think it's got to end this year. And if it doesn't end next year, I think there'll be a bit of a shock in for the World Cup, and it might happen then.
I guess I'd say too that at that top level, there's actually not as much as people think between the sides. Sometimes a side doesn't show up and gets pasted. This is now at international level particularly. But a side that shows up that's motivated and committed, and you see that in World Cups, semi-finals and quarterfinals and knockout games are very rarely won by substantial margins. Australia just about got knocked out by Scotland in the last World Cup. Scotland played really well, and they were, an incorrect refereeing decision.
Won. Yeah, if I remember, Scotland won.
Yeah, but that's the point, though, is that you're dealing with close margins. We could have lost to South Africa very, very easily in the semi-final. They played very well that day, and probably don't get the respect they deserved for what was a very high-quality, disciplined performance.
Absolutely, and I think I think that World Cup felt comfortable in comparison to others. But even then, like you said, was it 1 point in the semi-final? I can remember 1 or 2 points.
I think it was 3 points. I think it was 3 points in the semi-final, and then the final was an aberration. Yeah, and the final was a bit of an aberration in terms of the fact that I think it was probably since the first one, the biggest scoreline, the differential.
Absolutely. Yeah, and it was really moments of individual brilliance, and then that points lead. But Australia started clawing back. So yeah, the scoreline was it was a weird game.
A yellow card in the final, and it turned the whole thing on its head. Speaking of which, by the way, I don't understand. Now, I'm saying this as someone who's really been passionate about rugby for the thick end of 20 years. I don't understand the modern contesting the ball in the air rules anymore. I just don't get them. And I watched a game at the Blues at the weekend, and I see refereeing calls, and I just don't understand now how you're supposed to compete for the ball in the air. I don't know if you guys can help out on this, but I'm lost.
The next stage to rugby dominance is to just go up and down the field jumping in the air because you can't be touched. So it's going to hop, skip, and jump rugby.
We'll get Paul to note that one down because that's a good one, and we'll bring that up for one of our future rugby chats, and we can have more in-depth conversation around that.
I was going to say, that's a bit of a rabbit hole you're heading down, aren't you? I thought we were talking about. But
I think I must say, Pierre for a while.
I'm in trouble. Yeah, Pierre, you're allowed to come on more than one show. You don't have to get through every single topic tonight. Andre has said though that actually he said, look, it's 8:50, Paul. Don't you dare cut this chat short. So you're doing something good. I don't know what it is because I'm concentrating on the chat in here, not the chat on there. But I'd say you don't have to get through every topic tonight. We do have another 52 weeks of the year to do this.
Yeah, absolutely. Can we just go back to that one of those Pro Bowl style questions? I think one of the other really interesting challenges in that space would be to see a bit of investment in the women's game. I don't know how. I mean, you have the real issue of developing and being able to find enough players to play at a reasonable level. But that would be an area that, like women's cricket, you're starting to see. If you put it on television, people start to follow it. If they start to follow it, they start to go to games, and it all starts to play in together. And to me, the opportunity is there. Maybe you start in country with derbies, with supporting a semi-pro team to actually start playing each other.
The fact that we have a women's NPC competition means that there's enough players to then obviously have 5 women's teams through the New Zealand conferences anyway. And it's just like when, even if, and I think Australia's actually got some good numbers, I believe, for women's rugby over there. I don't know what South Africa's like, but at the end of the day, you could still at least start with, when we're having the New Zealand conference derbies, the women's game plays as well as, and the same teams can be playing, and I think it would work really well. I actually think that's where rugby's missing a trick here, is that build up on game day. We should have a development game, the women's game, and then the men's game, and it's got to be packaged. That's about the package, and it's interesting because it comes back to, I believe, revenue. Now, this is revenue outside broadcasting. This is revenue for the teams in the stadium. If you want to get more people there, you've got to add more value, and that's adding value by having a development game, a women's game, and a men's game.
And that's what the Warriors do here in Auckland. When they host a game at 7:30, they have games that start at 12:30 of the day. So you take the family down. Yeah, and they do, and you spend the whole afternoon sitting in there. If you're if you're passionate about it, watching gradually increasing quality or levels of rugby league until you get the pros at the end of the day.
Okay.
And I mean, our argument has always been, Ashwin and I have talked about this and belaboured the loss of the curtain raiser, but there's nothing that prepares you for a good game of rugby quite like a good game of rugby. One good game leads to another. But they,
My son is a bit different when it comes to kids and sport, but he's only 6 and he likes going along and watching the game before the Blues game.
They should be.
That's because
he has that
the
usual respect that he'll sit there and watch it.
Yeah, exactly. But those games should be finishing at 7:15, 20 past 7 for a 7:30 kickoff. The pros should be warming up on the backfield and coming out as they need it. The idea of getting them off the field 45 minutes before the game is just lunacy.
I mean, Eden Park's a classic environment where you've got that backfield which can be used for their warm-ups. There's no reason for them to warm up on the field.
Yes, but 100% agree.
So that would open up that exactly what you've just talked about. That women's game, development game, to be played on the main ground.
It's probably one for another night, but I think it comes back to the mindset of the game day experience from the franchise, and they're not focused on what's best for the game day franchise fan. They're interested in what's best for our revenue, for our sponsors, and for our broadcasters. Sorry, yeah. Because if you focus on the fan on the day, it's a no-brainer.
Look, as we'll just moving along a bit in terms of, and we've sort of covered this one off anyway, but quickly, what do you think what led to the demise of the 18-team conference system format?
Not playing every team, every team not playing every team. Simple as that. A complicated point system.
We've got all that with a 15-team comp. I would say it's dilution, personally. I think the quality of the rugby has just plummeted. And the accessibility of it's plummeted too. When I was a student, I used to watch all Super Rugby games of a weekend because there'd be 5 or maybe 6. And you could literally watch every game feasibly. Friday night, a couple on a Saturday, one on Sunday morning and one on Sunday afternoon. And it wasn't, given I was a student, all I had to do was drink beer and study stuff.
Dude, you weren't married with children.
No, exactly. But yeah, to me, I think it was the quality of the product diluted and everyone just tuned out. It's
I think also having the different size conferences and having 3 teams qualifying from Africa and 5 teams qualifying from Australasia, and they just made it too complicated. And the answer, it goes back to the old thing: keep it simple, stupid. As the Motley Fool tries to say. Now that's investment advice, but which is clearly not a field that I should really be going into. But I think it applies here as well. That just keep it simple. Don't be trying to overly complicate it, because people don't have time to get to understand these things. If you're going to try a new concept, which conferences were, you needed to keep it as simple as possible, and that was a major failure.
And then the quality is not helped by the fact that you've got your experienced players basically get to the experienced stage and they decide that, I'll go make some coin up north. And
that's happening earlier and earlier. Look at Sopowanga's going.
Yeah.
For example,
Charlie Piutau, Charlie Faumuina.
Now, that is one of our key topics. Before we head down that one, that's a key topic for tomorrow night on the All Black show. So little teaser for tomorrow night is, we'll be talking about the player exodus then. So tune in for that one tomorrow night, folks. Yeah.
Our first broadcast on the DrivingMaul, the All Blacks edition. Is that what we're calling it?
I'm not sure if we're calling it the All Blacks edition or the All Blacks Rugby edition, but something along those lines. Yes, the All Blacks edition.
There was a better name, but Paul chickened out of it. But we won't mention that on air.
Oh, go for it. Yeah, go mention it on air. See, my favourite one was once you go All Blacks, you never go Bok. There we go.
Love a good pun.
Oh, well, so to wrap things up for this evening, we'll move on to the games that we have got in front of us coming up this weekend. Nice full round of games coming up. We're starting with the Blues and Hurricanes, obviously on a Friday night. David, your pick for the Blues Hurricanes? Well, I know which way you're going to go. What do you think the score's going to be, or the difference?
I think it'll be closer than people expect. I think it'll be about 40 points. No, seriously, probably. I think any New Zealand derby game, Blues were competitive against earlier in the season. They've just been so close on a number of occasions. They've made poor decisions within their games, but I'd be surprised if the Hurricanes even got 12 points on them, to be honest. Now, if the Hurricanes go beat them 50-12, I'm just going to turn around and walk out and not do any more picking anymore.
Pierre?
Oh, look, I'm going to go Hurricanes 13 plus, but I haven't been following enough rugby to really make an informed guess on this.
It's not good enough.
Yeah, we don't like
making
informed,
notes here.
We just like opinion.
Okay, let me belay that. Hurricanes 13 plus, based on a very sophisticated algorithm that I developed.
Jack's gone Hurricanes by 30. I'm going Hurricanes by 15.
Right. I'll go Blues by 20 like I always do.
You're 30 years too late.
Now the game that we're all waiting for this weekend, obviously, one of the games Sunwolves Reds. David, do you want to go with start us off again?
Yeah, every kind of close game this season I've got wrong, so I'll say Reds, but I want Sunwolves.
Definitely the Reds, Brad Thorne, and they used to heat and humidity. But I like what Brad Thorne's doing there. He's putting some basics in place.
Paul?
It's amazing. For the guy who hasn't watched much rugby recently, he suddenly comes out with in-depth analysis of the Reds. I mean, wow.
On Brad Thorne.
On Brad Thorne, yeah.
Maybe it's the algorithm. Then a little part of me stirs every time I say big bad Brad Thorne out loud.
Well, the chat's disagreeing with you. Everyone in the chat's going Sunwolves, and I think this is the one game of the season that Sunwolves can win. I'm going Sunwolves by 3, and I reckon this weekend is the hardest weekend of picks that I can remember. But there we go. Yeah, everyone.
Yeah.
Oh, we've got a couple of Reds now, but yeah, mainly Sunwolves in the chat.
Yeah, I'm actually going to go with the Reds because, well, the thing is, as Pierre said, they seem to be my mate Brad. He's starting to form a pretty good unit there. I mean, obviously they struggled with the younger squad to start with, but they're starting to come together. Let's remember they beat the Lions, only a couple of weeks ago.
So do the Blues. So, the Lions just can't cope with colours. They're colourblind.
But so yeah, I'm going to go Reds by 3. But as we've always said, by 3 means it's a bit of a lottery. Crusaders Waratahs. Here we go. Is it going to be number 39? What do you reckon, David?
39, no doubt. I'd say it will be a tight game for 40 minutes, and that'll be about it. And Crusaders will open up. I'd say Crusaders by 18.
I think it'll be a tight game for about 4 to 6 minutes, and then the Crusaders will open up and finish by 10. Yeah. No, Crusaders by plenty.
I got the Crusaders Rebels was tight until half time. It's only a 2-point game. But
look, professional rugby players playing each other is always tighter than people think. The games are closer even when there's a blowout, or should be.
So I've got a Crusaders by 18 in the chat from Jack again. Crusaders by 20, Crusaders by 14. Yeah, so the chat's all going big. I'm going Crusaders by 15.
Yeah, I'm going Crusaders by 20. I just sort of think they'll do that last 20-minute thing where they'll score 4 tries in the last 20 minutes. Moving on to the Highlanders coming back from South Africa against the Lions.
Which Lions team is playing?
Well, actually, good question that, because I have that discussion with my son all the time. Is it the Lions from South Africa? Is it the Lions that the All Blacks play, or is it the Lions that play in the ITM Cup? But
there's a French referee joke in there somewhere, but I'm not going to make it.
Oh boy, it's at Carisbrooke, isn't it? Oh, sorry, Carisbrooke. Yep. It's in Otago.
Couple container.
Yeah, I think it'll be tight. I'd say Highlanders by 8.
Good Pierre, mate.
Look, my sophisticated algorithm says Highlanders, but by 12 or under. That's about as far as I'd go. They'll squeak a win there.
Squeaky bum time.
Yeah, and the Highlanders looked really tired last week. We don't know which side the Lions are going to turn up, but we've got sort of Lions, Landers, Highlanders, Landers in the chat. So mainly Highlanders, and I'm going to go the same way. Highlanders by 3. I think it's going to be a tight one.
Yeah, I think the Highlanders got a bit of a kick up the bum last week, and that might just spur them on a bit. And so I'm going to go by the Landers by 8. Moving right along. Hey, here's a win for the Australians. Brumbies Rebels.
Based on last time Brumbies played Rebels, which I think was about round 4 or 5, I'm going to go Rebels. I know Rebels are obviously playing different to how they played at the start of the season, but I saw a young team going against a Brumbies team that had basically no tricks. Brumbies have got better, but I'm still picking the Rebels. Pretty tight, just because neither team are going to score a lot of points, so Rebels by 3.
So I've got a sophisticated algorithm that says the name of this podcast is The Driving Maul, and the Brumbies do driving mauls, therefore the Brumbies will win. So I'd say Brumbies by 5 to 10.
Paul, chat room?
Chat room, Brumbies so far. I agree with them. I'm going Brumbies by 3. I think this is there's a lot more than I'm going by 3 because I think they're all going to be close and just buy bounce the ball. But yeah, Brumbies to squeak it. They said so. Brumbies to squeak it.
Yeah, I think the Rebels will be feeling it after getting beaten up by the Crusaders last week. And based on that, I'm going to go with the Brumbies. I'm going to go by about 7. So moving along to the Stormers Chiefs. Chiefs off the loss to the Huggy Warriors and then travelling over to the Republic.
And a quick reminder: the Stormers haven't lost at home this season.
Yes.
Yeah, Stormers all day long. Sorry. Stormers by 12.
Pierre, what's your algorithm saying?
It's saying the Chiefs aren't going to win. So, yeah, I'll go Stormers.
What? What planet are you guys on? Jeez, all going Stormers. So we're starting off with a draw in the chat, and then Chiefs by 1. Yeah, this is going to be a close one. I'm going Chiefs by 3. Andre, being South African, has got Stormers by 10, but hey, the South Africans always are patriotic in that kind of sense. But yeah, I'm Chiefs by 3.
Yeah, the boys are upsetting old Jess at the moment by picking against the Chiefs, but geez, it's a tough one. I'm gonna sit on the fence on this one. Actually, I'm gonna go with the draw. Why not? I'll get a sore bomb. Right, and moving to the last game of the weekend, the Bulls coming up against the South Sea Sharks. Will the D-size Bulls turn up or the A-size Bulls turn up for that game? What do you reckon, David?
Hang on, you trying to do the she sells seashells on the seashore thing?
I was just trying to spit out their name, actually.
So I think the algorithm goes that if the Lions turn up, the Bulls don't. So I am not predicting the Lions to turn up. So I'm going to say the Bulls will turn up this week and win it by 1. Closest to a cop-out you can go.
Yeah, look, I'm going to pick the Sharks, but only because I like the name of the Sharks.
The Sharks.
Sharks. Not tall. They used to have Ian McIntosh, that crazy coach with the crazy eyes. They were a very, very good outfit back in the 90s, early 2000s.
Paul, what's the old chat room say?
I don't know, but apparently, yeah, we're going through history. Anyway, very tight. Sharks by 15 or more. Sharks play well at Loftus in general, apparently. So Bulls by 3. It's all over the shop. I'm going Bulls by 3 as well because it's one it's too tight for me to call. And I don't do sitting on the bench. On the bench? No, sitting on the fence. They never let me off the bench.
No, I'm gonna tough one to pick. I think hometown advantage is but it'll be tight. I'm going Bulls by 3.
I mean, the Sharks, another one of these teams have they suddenly clicked, or did they just have a decent game and they're going to be useless again? I mean, who knows?
Yeah. Alrighty. I'll hand back to Paul to sort of farewell us for the evening.
Bye, everybody. Okay, thank you everyone for joining us. Please don't forget to subscribe. And we're trying to get the audience up, so that's there you go. And social media is all about clear calls to action. So if that's not clear, I don't know what is. So also tell all your mates, that kind of stuff. Subscribe if you're on the podcast or YouTube. And David, why don't we let people know where they can get hold of you during the week to have a quick chat about rugby, if you're going to actually use your new Twitter handle.
Yeah, I have a Twitter handle. There's been a grand total of 1 post. It was a graph to Paul. So if you want to reach out on Twitter, I probably won't reply. DJ M Hill 83 on Twitter.
For someone who will reply and will also talk about politics, head over to Ashwin. Ashwin, what's your Twitter handle?
My Twitter handle is NZFatso there on Twitter, and I'll see you there.
And Pierre hasn't got a label because Pierre is a social media ghost. But thank you for joining us, Pierre. Thank you for joining us, all of you guys. I'm Paul, the guy behind DrivingMaul, the best place for Twitter opinion and... Twitter opinion? No, I keep saying that. I mean rugby opinion and predictions. So head on over there and enjoy whatever rugby you're watching. I just realised I have to turn it off on this other computer, not on this. I'm all over the place tonight. Dear me. Thank you, everybody. Bye.